about the state and private visit of His Imperial Majesty. I'll be speaking about the state and private visit of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie to Britain, and that's what we're here celebrating today, the Emperor being a free man of the city of Bath. And in Sean and Rob's presentation, they mentioned that, there's different opinions about the emperor out there. And from my perspective, who studied Haile Selassie since I was 17 years old intensively, I think it's because there's a lack of knowledge and information, accurate information about what the emperor actually did and what his achievements were. And this is one of the big things that's affected Ethiopia, but even wider than that, in the world at large. Haile Selassie in the 20th century is one of the most famous figures in world history and one of those change makers in the world. And his history, in many ways, has been obliterated, and it lives on with the people that still remember what he did and what he did for the world. So in the 1950s, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie was the most traveled and decorated world leader. In this time, 69 years ago, 1954, His Majesty was embarking on his world tour. He had stabilized and rebuilt Ethiopia to a particular level where this person that is called an autocratic dictator that apparently had to see every single decision happen, he was able to leave his country to visit many countries across the world because he had set up a government and institutions to actually take care of Ethiopia's progress. And the emperor during this period and on to the 70s became this figurehead for Ethiopia. So in 1954, His Imperial Majesty, he visited Gabon, Tunisia, Liberia, Nigeria, Morocco, Zambia, Malta, Vatican City, United States, Mexico, Greece, Austria, Sweden, Denmark, France, Britain, the Netherlands, Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. Details of the emperor's visit to Britain were announced at the beginning of October to the British public. But because of the scale of the ceremony and everything that happened for the emperor, the British government and the Queen, they must have been planning this for some months before, and the emperor was the second visitor that Queen Elizabeth was to receive after her coronation in 1953. Britain was the first port of call for the emperor in Europe, and he stopped in Malta, and then he sailed to Britain aboard the HMS Gambia. He was returning to Britain 14 years after his time as a refugee here. There was a great contrast between the emperor's arrival in 1936, when the government didn't recognize Haile Selassie, and 1954, when they went all out and it was a state visit. The HMS Gambia, as it arrived in Portsmouth, was accompanied by a fleet of the British Navy, and they were all flying the Ethiopian colors. As the Navy ship arrived with the emperor, the RAF did a flyover with Shackletons, and they flew the Ethiopian colors 3 times, spraying out of the back of the plane to let everyone know that Haile Selassie was arriving. When the emperor arrived at Portsmouth and set back again on British soil, the Duke of Gloucester, Prince Henry, was sent to greet him, as well as the mayor of Portsmouth was there. And the emperor was accompanied by his son, the Duke of Harrar, Prince Makonnen. He received a 41-gun salute in Portsmouth, and then the emperor visited Portsmouth Guildhall and was received with an address presented by the mayor of Portsmouth. After this, the emperor boarded a train, and he was accompanied by the Duke of Gloucester to Victoria Station in London. At Victoria Station had been heavily decorated for the occasion, covered with Ethiopian and British flags. The Queen was there waiting on the platform to receive His Imperial Majesty. He was the first guest, Haile Selassie was first a guest in Britain of Queen Elizabeth's grandfather. That's an important understanding of the relationship between them. And when Haile Selassie became a global icon, when he was the most famous man in the world, people were making jokes about his name and saying Haile Salubrious here in Britain, because he was so famous that he had gone into that common vernacular. The Queen at that time was around 10 years old, so you can imagine the impression of her being told about this leader in that time, and that this is the relationship between Haile Selassie and Queen Elizabeth. To the emperor, she is that 10-year-old child most likely, and he is the guest of her grandfather. And now this is 1954, she's the Queen of England. So the Queen was accompanied by the Queen Mother, the Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Margaret, Princess Mary, and the Duchess of Gloucester, and then political leaders, Sir Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister at this time, Mr. Anthony Eden, who was a great friend and supporter of Haile Selassie in the 1930s, and Sir David Maxwell Fyfe. And I've got some pictures here. This was the Emperor with Queen Elizabeth, and he's in a horse-drawn carriage, and they're taking off from Victoria Station to go to Buckingham Palace. As the Emperor left the train station in that horse-drawn carriage, which had 4 horses, after the inspection of a guard of honour, the police in Britain, in London, struggled to hold back the crowds because they were so excited that Haile Selassie was there. The London streets were closed for 2 hours, and this was a Thursday morning. So just to, people stopped their lives in London because Haile Selassie was arriving. The streets from Victoria to Buckingham Palace were decorated with Ethiopian and British flags, and the Ethiopian flag was the Lion of Judah that we see flying today here in the assembly rooms. The Emperor and the Duke of Harrar, his son, would stay at Buckingham Palace for 3 days as part of their official state visit. That afternoon, the emperor laid a wreath on the tomb of the unknown warrior at Westminster Abbey, and then he had tea with the Queen and the Queen Mother at Clarence House. In the evening, and this is the 14th of October, so we're going to be running through the 14th of October right up to the 28th when the emperor's stay was ending in Britain. In the evening of the 14th of October, there was a royal banquet that took place for 160 guests at Buckingham Palace. The Queen conferred the most noble order of the Garter on His Imperial Majesty, and the most noble order of the Garter is the highest order of chivalry and knighthood that exists in this land. She also conferred the Royal Victorian Green Order on the Emperor's son, the Duke of Harar, but in response, Haile Selassie, he conferred the Order of the Seal of Solomon on Queen Elizabeth, and this is Ethiopia's highest order of chivalry. And there's always this question of who bowed to who, did the Queen of England bow to this Ethiopian monarch? Well, you can bet your bottom dollar, if you're becoming a knight, you best bow to the person that's knighting you. And the emperor was underscoring Ethiopia's independence and its ancient history. To be recognized as a Knight of the Garter, immediately he's making the monarch of Great Britain a knight in his order. The emperor, where am I? The emperor, on this evening, he gave a speech and thankful to the Queen and to be back in Britain after those years. But the next day, on the 15th of October, Queen Elizabeth was seen at the steps of Buckingham Palace with her children, Prince Charles, now King Charles, and Princess Anne. She brought them down the steps of the main entrance of Buckingham Palace to wave goodbye as Haile Selassie got back in a horse-drawn carriage, and then he went off to the City of London. In the City of London, this is an official part of the Emperor's state visit to Britain, the Emperor was presented with an official dress of welcome in a golden casket by the Lord Mayor of London. He presented the City of London with a set of finely decorated elephant tusks, along with a set of spears and a traditional hunting hat. And here's a picture here. I'll bring them on the table afterwards, but these are the elephant tusks, the decorative elephant tusks that are being delivered by the Emperor's people to the Guildhall in London. And they had no idea that the Emperor was going to present them with a gift, so it was a moment of drama when the doors swung open and then the Emperor's gift was brought to the Lord Mayor. And people will question about, I've had questions before about the ivory and the elephant tusks, but again, if you're the Emperor of Ethiopia and you've outlawed certain things like hunting, then you have access to certain fineaments to make decorative pieces in those times. The Emperor was a firm lover of animals and put many of Ethiopia's laws with regards to animals in Ethiopia during that time. At Mansion House in the City of London, Haile Selassie gave a very moving speech about his relationship and Ethiopia's relationship with Britain. And I'm just going to read three short parts from that speech now. Ever since those dark days when I was received with warm hospitality during my self-imposed exile, I have always entertained the deepest feelings of affection and friendship with this country. Since the opening of Ethiopia to the world, thanks in large part to British writers, community and similarity of interests have served to draw us ever more closely together throughout modern times. These forces culminated in the glorious comradeship in arms in which the blood of British sons was shed in the liberation of Ethiopia. The people of Ethiopia have long admired the unparalleled development of political institutions in this country and the role of the Crown in the development of national consciousness and culture in Britain. Already at the beginning of the 17th century, and notwithstanding the policy of isolation followed by the government of Ethiopia, its monarch entered into correspondence with King James I of England. I'd like to find that correspondence. If anyone knows about it, please message Ras Benji. In one of the vaults in Windsor rests the body of Prince Alamayu, who died in England towards the end of the last century. In keeping with our admiration for the British Crown, I have sent members of the imperial family to England for their education and training, and I myself came here 30 years ago to further strengthen the bonds of sympathy and mutual comprehension already so fully developed between our two countries. In Ethiopia, you have a sincere and devoted friend who asks but to deepen and develop the community of interests and ideals which unite us. And the Emperor, I think he shared an important part of his thinking there, because it was 30 years before this time, when he was a young man as the Prince of Ethiopia in 1924, that he first came to Britain to first make those bonds and connections between his country. And now with all that's transpired, the war, Britain's help, the liberation, the difficult time before that when he wasn't recognized by the British government, the Emperor's now back here 30 years later, 1954, and he's finally been given that respect that he deserves as this ancient monarch of Ethiopia that's representing this ancient history. On that evening of the 15th, the day after the Emperor arrived, underscoring Ethiopia's independence again, Haile Selassie hosted a dinner at the Ethiopian embassy for almost 60 guests. The Queen attended as an ordinary person and arrived wearing the Order of Solomon, and left British soil that evening to be a guest of Ethiopian hospitality. And this was reported in all the newspapers. So you can imagine this is part of the Emperor's state visit, and he's put that on pause, and he's hosting now on Ethiopian soil in Britain, and he's going to host the guests and people. It's very important, these little subtleties. The next day, on the 16th of October, the Emperor visited Lambeth Palace and 10 Downing Street, where a photograph was taken of the Prime Minister Winston Churchill symbolically bowing down his head to the Emperor of Ethiopia in the door of 10 Downing Street. On the 17th of October, the next day, Haile Selassie departed his state visit with the Queen at Buckingham Palace, and she wished him well on his 10-day private visit of Britain. And the Emperor, we think of it, and I even talk of it as the Emperor's state visit to Britain, but he had specifically arranged so that he was having this 3-day pomp and ceremony of the state visit, but then he was to depart as a private visitor in a country that he used to be resident. The Emperor, he visited Middlesex Hospital, and it was reported in the newspaper when the Emperor was photographed shaking hands with a Jamaican nurse in the hospital. And these are our Windrush nurses, or as they're called, the nurses of the Caribbean migration that came to Britain and that were training here in Bath. So that was an important moment, really, for this modern history of Britain, and the Emperor of Ethiopia shaking hands with this nurse. The Emperor and Prince Makonnen then visited Eton School, and they watched a football match together before setting off for Bath. And meanwhile, there was absolute pandemonium at a place called Fairfield House. It was widely anticipated that Haile Selassie was to return to Bath, and people were very excited. 400 plants were planted in the garden in anticipation of the Emperor returning. And the Allington Pippin's apple tree had all its apples wrapped up so that no one was able to pick them before Haile Selassie. All of the Emperor's furniture was taken out of storage by the matron that was there, Mrs. Rosalind Sawyer, and she had been taking care of the house in this time when the Emperor and his family weren't there. It was reported in the newspapers that everything was put back with great care so that it would be exactly the same as when the Emperor left, and it was especially reported that extra special care was taken to put the foreign minister's office back as it was, and that was Blatangeta Heroi, who you heard about in Sean and Rob's presentation, who passed away here 1938 and was one of the emperor's best friends. And so the thought must be there that the emperor had kept that room, which is our library and study room today, as it was, as the foreign minister's office. And he probably used to go in there and spend time, you know, remembering his friend and his life work. The newspaper reports also mention a special item that we have in the house today. It's the pianola. I think the journalists, they didn't get a chance to properly have a look at it. They called it a piano, but they said it's the very well-worn family piano. So it must have been a much-loved part of the household then as well. My favorite detail of these reports is that the front lawn of Fairfield House was mowed half an hour before the emperor's arrival. And I love the logistics of that someone said, look, he's on the motorway, he's just turning off, get on the mower, we need to have it clean and crisp for when the emperor arrives. There's lots of leaves coming down in October. Crowds had gathered outside the front gates of Fairfield House, and they were waiting for some time to cheer Haile Selassie in as he arrived. And we've recently been doing a project called the Testimonies Project, where we're interviewing elderly members of Bath, and we've interviewed people that were waiting there at the front gates for Haile Selassie when he arrived back in 1954. And you can see a picture here. It's a bit of a paparazzi shot. That's the emperor returning to Fairfield House 1954 with his son, and someone's just stuck the camera right up to the car window and shot the emperor as he's pulling into Fairfield House. But that evening, and I think about this quite often, the emperor returned to his home during that time of exile. And when he left Fairfield House, Haile Selassie left very abruptly. He literally had his briefcase, he went to London for a meeting, and the world situation had changed to the point where he was suddenly taken off to Bath. He didn't even have a time to go back, get his things, or speak to his family or anything. So communications for almost a year with his family back in Bath were actually quite stretched and quite difficult during that time. So the emperor actually never had a chance. He was so eager to get back to Ethiopia, he never had a chance to say goodbye or to, you know, absorb the environment at Fairfield House. And so what went through his mind that evening when, you know, he's just come off this state visit, he's back in his home, probably the fires are lit, it's October, and, you know, how must he have been feeling in that time? The next day, October the 18th, the emperor started the day at the Bath Spa Hotel, and that was the place that he first arrived when he was in Bath. But at that time, after World War II, the Bath Spa Hotel was a nurse's home, and other hotels in the city had been changed into offices of civil servants during that time. So Bath, in terms of this tourism and post-Georgian thing that it had going on, still a little bit in the 1930s, had changed, and it had become this industrial place. The emperor that day was made an honorary freeman of the city of Bath in the Guildhall, and that's the highest civic honor in Bath. The Guildhall flew the Ethiopian flag along with the British flag together on that day, and the emperor again presented a pair of decorated elephant tusks to the city of Bath, along with a specially made carpet. And this carpet has actually been offered to us by the Bath Record Office and the Guildhall, but we currently don't have the area or the space to display it at Fairfield House. But one day in future, we're hopeful that this special remembrance between the city of Bath and Ethiopia will come to Fairfield House. Haile Selassie visited the Stother and Pitt Steelworks, Ralph Allen School, and the Bath Biscuit Factory also on that day. Staying at Fairfield House again that evening, the next day Haile Selassie visited Bristol. He was received by a reception at the British Legion headquarters at Portland Square. and surprisingly, Haile Selassie was a patron of the British Empire branch of the British Legion and had occasionally attended their meetings during the time of exile. I imagine that the emperor was staying in tune with what the thoughts about the local British people were about the war and its influence across the world in that time. He presented the British Legion in Bristol with a gold medal, and he also visited the aeroplane headquarters during that time to see the industry of aeroplanes being made. The emperor, possibly that evening, he held a reception for friends in Bath and the southwest at Fairfield House. And we have photographs of Haile Selassie on that occasion standing in the living room in 1954 at a reception. The next day, the 20th of October we are now, just 7 days to go, the emperor went to Oxford and he was made a doctor of civil laws at Oxford University. The presentation of this doctorate was made by a man called Lord Halifax, who was the chancellor of the university. But it was a funny twist of fate because Lord Halifax was in favor of the fascists and Haile Selassie losing his country in the 1930s, and now he was having to award the emperor and show him around Oxford University. The next day, on the 21st of October, Haile Selassie visited RAF Duxford in Cambridgeshire and saw an air display, and he also visited the Royal Military College at Sandhurst. On the next day, Haile Selassie went down the Elstree mines in Hertfordshire. And I have a picture of Haile Selassie here down a mine in Hertfordshire. And I just think, it's amazing, all these things that the emperor was able to pack in to this state visit during this time. It's a bit like your trip to Ethiopia. The emperor, on the 23rd of October, visited the Twickenham Technical College, and he also attended a reception at Londonderry House. And he was also the guest of a special reception in London by the Anglo-Ethiopian Society, which was founded by Sylvia Pankhurst some years before, and it must have been a very special occasion for them to welcome the Emperor of Ethiopia to a reception in London. On the 24th of October, Haile Selassie cancelled his engagements and made a surprise return visit to Fairfield House, and the newspapers reported it that Haile Selassie rests, and that he suddenly turned around his plans and he's gone back to his home at Fairfield House to rest further. And we know how special Fairfield was to the emperor, but again, I think this just underscores it, that it was a place of refuge and it was a place of healing and sanctity for him. So even though he was struggling during that time, Fairfield House gave him this zeal, gave him this energy, renewed vigor for his efforts for whatever he's doing. And he employed this again in 1954. Perhaps with a plan, because the next day the emperor may have made a private visit to Swansea. We don't know, need to confirm. But Haile Selassie had a relationship with the Bible College of Swansea, and there was a reverend there called Rhys Howes. And during the 1930s, Rhys Howes embarked on intercessional prayer, which was almost like a prayer battle for Ethiopian freedom. And Haile Selassie actually went to join Reverend Rhys Howes for a 2-week Bible camp, where he was camping in the grounds of the Bible College of Wales. And at the end of that Bible camp, World War II was announced. So Haile Selassie must have felt that things were changing in the world. In this time in 1954, Reverend Rhys Howes had passed away, but the emperor would have been going to see his wife and the other students at the college, and to, again, just to walk in those things that are really meaningful to him in Britain. Haile Selassie, the next day, on the 26th of October, he attended a debate in the House of Commons, and this is the last thing. The emperor kind of slips from the record towards the end of this visit of what he was up to. I imagine that he was catching up on private visits with different acquaintances and friends during the time of exile, because the next day, on the 27th of October, Haile Selassie departs the United Kingdom. His Majesty has a quote which says, "Unless a man undertakes more than he can possibly do, he will never be able to do all that he possibly can." And I think this attitude of the Emperor is exemplified by His Imperial Majesty's state visit to Britain in 1954, where he did many things. What is special for us at Fairfield House, looking back at the Emperor's visit to Britain 69 years ago, and it ended yesterday, 69 years ago, and beyond, to his enduring legacy across the world, is that both in the city of Bath and for His Majesty, we were provided with all the ingredients to make us cook up something really, really special. The Emperor's Freeman certificate, the scroll that was presented to Haile Selassie, the city of Bath did a drawing where the Roman baths, Pulteney Bridge, and Fairfield House are intertwined together and are presented as Bath's special heritage. And I have one of these here, this one. I'll put on the table afterwards. You can have a closer look. Also, the Mayor of Bath said on that day in the Guildhall that all people will agree that this is one of the greatest days in Bath's history. And the Emperor, when he was asked by journalists what he's most looking forward to seeing in Britain, Haile Selassie gave them a clear and direct answer. He said, "I'm most looking forward to seeing my home, Fairfield House, and that he'll always consider the West Country to be his second home." That's what the Emperor left us with. So that's the end of my rundown of what happened on His Imperial Majesty's state and private visit to Britain in 1954. And today we're celebrating the legacy of the Emperor here at Fairfield House. And another part of the legacy of the Emperor is his place at the United Nations. And our next speakers, Ras Emmanuel and Ras Hugo, if he's here, they'll be speaking about the urgent need to reform the United Nations. So thank you very much, everyone.
I just want to ask for another round of applause for Benji, because you see how he slips in the applause for... I learned a lot, that's amazing. You need to publish.
Yeah.
Impressive, that's my brother Tribune. Good to see you, my brother. You coming over this side? Yeah, come over. Yeah. We're going to sing some acoustic for you. No one laughs. They probably think it's serious.
I was laughing. She can hear it. She's able to sing.
We're on your way here. Could you see?
No, I'm
Yes,
all right.
yeah, you can see. Okay. Yeah, greetings, everyone. Thank you for the organisers for the invitation to speak today. I'm Sean Sobers, and this is Rob Mitchell, my long-time colleague. So thank you all for coming today, and really exciting to see what's going on today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. So we're going to be talking about our recent trip to Ethiopia. We were there this time last month. We came back, what day did we get back?
23rd.
On the 25th of September
25th.
we came back.
September.
So not long ago at all. So we'll be taking you through some of the things that we saw, some of the experiences, and some of the things that we learnt. It's my first trip to Ethiopia, but it didn't start off quite as we planned. We took Turkish Airlines because the budget wouldn't quite stretch to Ethiopian Airlines, and because it was a kind of a last-minute operation, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So the first day we got stranded in Istanbul because the flight out of Heathrow was late and then it made us miss our connection. So it didn't quite start off as planned, but we got there and it was all good. One of the first things that we did, or the first thing that we did when we landed, that we booked a full day tour of Addis Ababa. You know, we're doing this talk as well for those of you who might want to visit that have never been there before, so some guidance of how to navigate things and operate. Viator is a tourism sort of, you know, tour company website, and you know, I've used them in other places to see that Addis Ababa and other places of Ethiopia are also plugged into the Viator website. So we got a whole day experience, and we'll go through some of these sites that we saw. Jump in at any point as well, because I'll just talk. The first thing we went to was Addis Ababa University, Gunut Palace, which translates as Paradise of Princes, which is now, as it says there, Addis Ababa University, and it's also the home of the Institute of Ethiopian Studies. One of our good friends, Dr. Tekele from Fairfield, at Fairfield House, he's a good friend of Fairfield House and done a lot of support with us, so it was really great to be in his space. Do you want to talk, Rob, about that spiral and one of the first things that we saw when we got to Addis Ababa University and that statue by the Italians?
If I remember rightly, that's right. So that. I mean, obviously, Ethiopia is a place which is steeped in a lot of history, lots of its own story. What was fascinating about this monument, if I remember it rightly, maybe somebody better informed can correct me, is that this was put up by the Italian occupiers at the time of the occupation. And I can't remember what it symbolizes now. I can't remember. It was a lion at the top, that's right, it's a lion at the top. And sorry again? Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, okay, so whatever the symbolism, the point is it was put up by the Italian occupiers. And what was interesting was that when the emperor came back, it was kept up. And this idea throughout the trip of preserving, holding on to the histories, good or bad, you see this in the Derg later on or whatever, there's something important about that. Holding on to history, however, whether it's your history or not, it's part of the history of the place.
And just learn from it and layer on top of that history. As you can see there, the university was once called Haile Selassie University. At the top, that's Lul, who was our tour guide, and pointed at a photograph of Menelik II, who was, very influential emperor, still highly revered in the country. And there, a beautiful portrait of His Majesty. The museum space there, I mean, I went there not really knowing what to expect, really. And the museum space at the university is extensive, is huge. I mean, it's a former palace, so it's got lots of His Majesty's artifacts and, you know, the original artifacts and clothes, etc., etc. You know, this is His Majesty's bed. Then next door was Empress Menin's bed. The bed itself wasn't there at that point, but they still got the space preserved. But then in the museum, they've also got other exhibits about other parts of Ethiopia, you know, other communities that live and their customs, etc. And it's absolutely huge, and I was really pleased to see that even though it's a university building, they're still respecting the space, knowing that there's an interest in that history, and actually giving over that time for education in a different way, which you don't often see in a university building, which would be occupying every room, you know, for lectures, for that kind of footfall. So it was a really good introduction to Addis on the first day, and to see that history is kind of respected in the way that it is. Went up to Entoto, we're in our boy band outfits. It was absolutely chucking it down, and God bless Rob for bringing these bright fluorescent Macs, because they really did help us. But it's a beautiful space. We couldn't stay there that long because it was torrential. and then went to Shiro Meda Market. I'll talk a little bit about that, the photograph on the top right, a little bit later. But it's a huge kind of market warehouse. Yeah, just fascinating place, full of, you know, all different types of clothes and scarves and shawls and things like this. Bearing in mind, this is all one day. This is all on the first day. Addis Ababa restaurant, which is said to be the oldest restaurant in Addis Ababa, or was it in the country? Maybe even the country.
Probably the country, I don't know. But, yeah.
And what was the drink? It's honey.
Oh yeah, honey. Was it honey? It was alcoholic anyway. Something alcoholic with honey. It was nice. Was it honey wine?
Honey wine.
Was it honey wine?
Honey wine.
It was bloody strong. Honey, Tudge. Thank you very much. But, yeah, that's it. It was very nice. Yeah.
And then off to a coffee shop. But again, it's our cultural experience, you know, coffee being the birthplace of, Ethiopia being the birthplace of coffee, which many people don't know. So actually being in the source of the space where the fuel that energizes the global north, actually, that, you know, that fuel comes to the global south. So I think that's always a really interesting concept. Without coffee in the morning, then, you know, industry dies. But
Ethiopia
actually,
is the birthplace of everything.
Yeah,
Ethiopia kind of is back to the idea of the history. Ethiopia has that place. It presents itself as the birthplace of everything. I mean, Lucy is there. For instance, we didn't go to see Lucy, but Lucy is the ancient hominid.
the first human.
So, birthplace of humanity. There was also, we were told in the geography that it's the birthplace of the River Nile, where although Ethiopia had a lot of its water removed or something, or bordered away from it, it's still, that's a significant idea that, anyway, a birthplace of lots of things, including coffee.
You want to talk about Mercato?
Okay, so the market, is that right? Yeah, so we went to the the Mercato thing, that's right, we went through that. I don't remember the donkeys, I don't remember the donkeys, I was quite surprised to see the donkeys. We did see some donkeys though, but one of the things, the Mercato is the market, I guess, and it was busy. We went through there at a time of day when no car should be driving through that place. Thankfully, we weren't doing the driving, we didn't have anywhere to go in particular, so it was quite interesting, quite intriguing. Trying to take photographs out the window, which is a bit risky. There's a few times, there's lots of tensions in Ethiopia. I mean, one of the things, the slide before, where we were looking at the history, the university as a museum, one of the other things that Ethiopia is constantly trying to do is hold together its many different ethnicities. It presents itself as having 85 different ethnicities in the country. So one of my favorite sayings anyway is that there's no blacks in Africa. And that's really evident in this place. And in the same way that it's trying to hold on to all these different histories, it also has to balance all these different cultural differences and all these different ethnicities. So, which is kind of what it's probably can touch on that another time, but that's a thing.
Yeah.
But the market was a flavour of that. You get to say that the market, when you go through the market, you get a flavour of that busyness and that diversity and all these people doing business and these different quarters and these different ethnic groups and expressions and stuff like that. Busy.
Yeah. And I think for me, I don't want to speak for Rob, but for me, I think being in the Mercato district was probably one of the times I felt overwhelmed because it was so huge, so busy. I mean, it was really hectic. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And so driving through that, and I actually felt, I didn't take many pictures in this space as well, because actually, you know, you saw a lot of poverty there as well. Do you know what I mean? So you don't want to be a tourist driving through the space and doing that kind of disaster tourism kind of thing. But, you know, fascinating to see. So the next sort of big significant cultural space, St. George's Cathedral. So this is a space where His Majesty had the coronation in 1930. So highly significant, beautiful. And just coming up to it, you felt the reverence, you know, the worshippers on the edges, before you even get into the grounds, they're on the walls, by the wall, and they're praying with their foreheads on the wall, even before they're getting into this main area where the church is, and really beautiful. It's in this, I think it's a six-sided cathedral, and yeah, really stunning, just walking around it, and you really got that sense of reverence. So then going inside, so we had to arrange to go inside. You can't just go there and turn up and go in. It all has to be pre-arranged. So that was part of the that was part of the trip. We had the agreement to go in there. So this is Archdeacon Mabrat, who's the Archdeacon of St. George's Cathedral, and showed us around the space. And yeah, it's a really beautiful space. It's very kind of moving. It's quite narrow between where the structure of the building is to where you would be as the congregation. I've never been in a church in that way, and it's round. You know, you walk all the way around the circumference with the main structure in the middle. So yeah, really unique architecture. That space where we both stood there, so that was the actual spot was where the coronation took place on 2nd of November 1930. The other thing that really struck me in the cathedral was the paintings of His Majesty. Paintings of His Majesty on the battlefield. You know, we've seen photographs of these with his foot on the unexploded bomb, and then at the bottom is His Majesty giving the speech at the League of Nations. And then on the right-hand side is where His Majesty is raising the flag on the 5th of May on Liberation. So it's really striking again, seeing actual paintings of His Majesty in a cathedral, which is obviously a very high church. So that was quite enlightening. And then also attached to the museum, well, I say attached, it's in the grounds of the cathedral, but there's a building to the side. They've got a museum space as well, where you can actually see the actual, you know, the robes that His Majesty and the Empress wore, the chalice that contained the holy oil at the cathedral, you know, the cross, you know, the Bible that was read at the coronation. So, you know, just priceless in terms of seeing these objects up close. And Archdeacon Mabrat also showed us this painting, very striking painting, which was commissioned by an artist at the time, and it's kind of crying for Ethiopia during its troubles of, you know, during the liberation. You can see the face there at the bottom of the Ethiopian shaped map, crying and weeping in the hands of St. Mary. And St. George, you know, many people don't know that St. George is the patron saint of Ethiopia. You know, I've always been interested by, you know, how St. George is presented in England as a form of a nationalist identity. It gets co-opted by the far right, but actually St. George is the patron saint of Russia, Portugal, Rio de Janeiro, Greece, you know, Ethiopia, Ladot, many places, Beirut, that St. George is the patron saint of. It's not just England. He's actually a multicultural figure rather than an English nationalist divisive figure. Did
people know that, generally speaking? Did people have an idea? Yeah?
Yeah.
I was going to ask, why was it called St. George's Cathedral in an Ethiopian country?
Yeah.
I expected it to have an Ethiopian name.
Yeah, so, I mean, Georgios would be the, yeah, exactly. Preempted. And yeah, there's many, you know, there'll be obviously the Ethiopian equivalent, but yeah, St. George is the patron saint. Is May, what's the St. George's Day in Ethiopia? Is it May? It's May, isn't it, I think?
Kurdus Gyurgis.
Yeah.
Kurdus Gyurgis.
Can't remember. It's early in May anyway, 23rd of April in England.
That was the time I asked the question about representation though. Can we touch on that?
Yeah, you can do, yeah.
At this point as well, I mean, having St. George is one thing. Thank you. But the painting and representation was another thing, because you go to Ethiopia as a black person, you're thinking Ethiopia, black, there's going to have the black Jesus, surely, right? And the black Mary and everything else. But no, and very, very rarely. At this point, I think I did ask the Archdeacon what I'm not sure how he answered it exactly, but I did ask him that question. Why is it that the figure's not represented as an African. I can't remember what he said exactly.
I can remember what he said.
Okay,
yeah,
what did he say?
because you asked him in St. George's Cathedral itself.
Was that what it was? Yeah.
And what he basically said is that it's not that important. Over here, we have a different perspective of the importance of race representation. And it goes back to your point about there's no blacks in Africa. So they're not really seeing the race and the skin colour in that same way. I mean, you do see African depictions of biblical characters, but you actually do see a lot of fair skin, white skin as well. But actually his answer when you asked him is actually just not that important. It's about our connection with God and these I don't want to say idols, there's a particular word for them, isn't there? The objects in the Ethiopian church. But they're just their ways
icons?
of you have icons. So having connections with God, and it just allows that kind of relationship. So they know it's a representation, you know, and as scholars of art and art history, we know that when we see a painting of a pipe, René Magritte, this is not a pipe because it's just a painting of a pipe. So it's the same thing. It's not Mary, it's not Jesus, it's just a representation of, it's not them in actual fact. So they see it as less important than we may hold it because we've got different struggles with race that they don't have in those predominant black skin spaces. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. Beautiful sculptures all over, and I'm going to show some more monuments on the next slide, but this was in the grounds of St. George's Cathedral.
Although he was back continues that kind of theme because he was the first African, wasn't he? The first African archbishop.
Yeah.
Was it archbishop? Was he archbishop?
Yeah, bishop, yeah. And he was the martyr. So during the Italian invasion, he refused to, denounce the Orthodox faith, he refused to denounce the monarchy, and still advocated for the rebellion against the Italian fascist regime, and he is executed by firing squad. So he became a martyr, so he's held in very high renown. And then monuments, during the drive around Addis, seeing monuments, won't go into, you don't have time to really talk about them, but as Rob said earlier, that there's some monuments that were put up by the Italians and then added to by the Ethiopians after liberation. So they're multi-layered and they tell multiple stories. I've been heavily invested in the whole Colston statue falling down. So I've done a lot of research into Bristol transatlantic slavery. So I've got called on to talk about that, but I always have to be honest and say I was never one to say it should be taken down. Have a new plaque on it, have a new monument near it to give it a different context. Now it's taken down, I don't want to put back up again, but actually there were other opinions in the room. It wasn't all take it down, take it down, take it down. So I think those voices need to be heard.
The interesting thing I'd add about monuments though is that they do serve as a kind of a real cohering factor for the people of the country to tell their own story. So several different, when you get different taxis, you go past a monument one day, you go past the same monument the next day, and the second taxi driver will give you exactly the same story about that monument. So there was a real
consistency.
Keeping that consistency about the national stories was quite strong. Everybody knew what that monument was, even if we've forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely. So all that was in the first day, and that was So after being stuck in Istanbul, it's probably a good thing we're stuck in Istanbul for the night, and we actually had a 5-star hotel in Istanbul. I should say that. Don't feel sorry for us.
The whole theme park.
Exactly. Yeah. So the 19th of September, we've got the Ethiopian dates as well, so they've got a different calendar.
Oh yeah.
So Tuesday the 8th of Meskerem 2016, so it's 2016 in Ethiopia now. So they've got a different calendar, different time system, which we won't have to go into, but different way of telling the time. But this was the reason we were in Ethiopia in the first place, is about what I'm going to show you now. And basically, I'll show you. I'll continue. I'll talk through it in here. So it was at St. George's, Holy Trinity Cathedral, which is the highest church, is the headquarters of the Ethiopian Orthodox Mezmur Church, the equivalent of Westminster Abbey for the UK. So a very high church. This is the only photograph that neither me or Rob took, because actually when we were there, the whole cathedral was covered in a tarpaulin because they're doing renovations. So Beth M527 gladly took this one. But the reason we were here was the reason why we were in Ethiopia, and it is for a reburial commemoration service for a gentleman named Blatangera Haraway Walda Selassie. Now Blatangera Haraway, he was the Ethiopian foreign minister, and he came over with His Majesty when His Majesty came to live in Bath. So Blatangera Haraway lived in Fairfield House and was very central to the Ethiopian entourage. He was the Ethiopian foreign minister, and he was the emperor's closest advisor and friend. So if you think about the emperors in exile, extremely traumatic circumstances why he was in England and living in Bath in the first place. And Blatangera Haraway sadly died on 19th of September 1938. And the funeral happened at Fairfield House, because there was a chapel at Fairfield, and we've got the reports of the funeral, and His Majesty and the Empress were crying, as reported at the funeral. And then we've also got the words that His Majesty spoke at the graveside. And Blatangera Haraway is buried in Locksbrook Cemetery, which many of you Bathonians would know. So I've done a lot of work about Blatangera Haraway, because when I made a film in 1999, Footsteps of the Emperor, I featured a small section of it about Blatangera Haraway. To cut a long story short, many years later in 2016, I met the great-granddaughter of Blatangera Haraway by accident at Fairfield House, and she had no idea that the grave still existed at Locksbrook Cemetery. She didn't even know he was buried there, because the body was exhumed in 1947 and taken back to Ethiopia. So for all she knew, that's where her great-grandfather was buried. And I had to tell her, no, there's a grave for him at Locksbrook Cemetery. And about 20, 30 of the Ethiopian community followed me down as I drove her down to the cemetery and showed it to her for the first time. So we vowed to get it restored. We managed to get it restored. In 2018, we had it unveiled. Prince Michael McConnell, His Majesty's grandson, unveiled it, and it continues. And there's been other things. Many of you were here for the Bath Abbey service that we did in 2019, the Ethiopian Orthodox service. That was also in tribute to Blatangera Haraway. So as a thank you for this work, I was really honoured that the great-granddaughter MU Tekramarian invited me to Ethiopia for this commemoration, because I didn't realise he was never reburied. His body, his body was in a crypt or something, and I didn't realise that. So this was actually the first reburial of Blatangera Haraway. So it was a really touching event. It was the Ethiopian Orthodox priests. So that's MU top left. I gave a talk. The whole ceremony was in Amharic. I was the only one to speak in English. I know they could understand me because they laughed at the right points. So there's always a little trick us lecturers have to see if people are paying attention. But really beautiful, TV cameras are there, things like that. And then this is the beautiful grave that was unveiled for Blatangera Haraway. So I absolutely have to give thanks to MU and her family for the invitation, because, as I said, this is my first time to Ethiopia, and I was starting to think it was never going to happen. This is the grave in Bath, and it's got Amharic writing on it. And I was really pleased to, I was talking to Ras Benji on the day when I was there, and he was talking about that he was at the grave, and other members from Fairfield House were at the grave at the same time in Bath, also observing and paying respects to. So that was a really beautiful echo, really. I'll hand back over to Rob, because I've been talking for a long time.
Oh,
Imperial Unity
Masaganello. I didn't know what to say. I was just reading my book of all my bits of Ethiopian that I'd written down. I can't. I'm trying to pick up on what you were. Apart from looking at the language, I was looking at.
That's all right. That's all right. I threw you in. I can.
You did. You did.
Walking back from Trinity, we went into there.
Oh yeah. What was this bit now? Unity Park? Was that Unity Park?
Yeah.
Okay, so Unity Park. Oh yes. Here we are. That means thank you, by the way. One of the things I was going to say earlier, actually, was one of the things that strikes you when you go to a place which has a completely different script is you are completely illiterate, and you're just back to square one. And that's quite fascinating in its own right, because you take for granted what you learn, what language and stuff, you know. But anyway, yeah. So after we went to the rededication and reburial, we braved the streets and tried and aimed to walk back to the hotel. Another luxury hotel, by the way. And we found ourselves in Unity Park. Now, I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, this used to be Menelik's Palace. It used to be known as Menelik's Palace. But the political leadership at the moment have, over the last few years, have changed it to Unity Park. Earlier I mentioned the fact that there's all these tensions, and Keith would know much better about some of these tensions, and so you people in this room know some about these tensions. But I think, as I understand it, that Unity Park was the kind of government's attempt to try to get all those different ethnic tensions and identities feeling a sense of oneness around the country's story, I think. Now, Menelik's Palace, now we have the whole Fairfield House community, there's no question about the Emperor, reverence to Haile Selassie, His Majesty, but that's not how all Ethiopians feel. Now, one of the things that you may remember in 2020, Sean mentioned the Colston statue, which probably a lot of these people in this room would say, yay! And what was interesting, and on the day, there were some people trying to defend the Commonwealth statue. So we thought maybe there'd be some racist backlash to the cenotaph in Bristol, some racist backlash. But what was interesting, one of the key statues that got defaced, inspired by Colston, was a statue of Haile Selassie in London. So that was because there are groups in Ethiopia who don't like that story, who do not want reverence to that story, who do not feel connected to that. Correct me if I'm wrong, I might be talking at my side ear, but that's how I understand it. So Unity Park used to be Menelik's Palace.
Imperial Palace.
Imperial Palace? Imperial Palace. So how the country, and currently the government are led by the ethnic majority, is that right, in Ethiopia? The Oroma ethnic majority, large group? Well, particularly large, significant ethnic group anyway. And I think, as far as I understand it, there's less kind of attachment to the emperor story, the Amharic story. So I think there's some tensions around that. So Unity Park, however, still does hold on to all the histories that are mentioned. To be fair, this is the one in Durgan at the bottom as well, isn't it? Yeah. Including, when we grew up, I haven't got Sean's got the nice bits in there, I think, but...
Shall I come on to that then?
Yeah,
so
come to this bit.
I'll show you some of that reverence and the respect of the history that, again, was pleasantly surprising to see. That it's got his mind your head, yeah. So His Majesty's thrones, His Majesty's crown. I mean, the place is huge. We've been very conservative of what we've included, because you would be here all day if we had to show you I mean, it's massive. Unity Park is huge. But it's also great to see things like this. Hard to take a photograph of because it is behind glass. But this is the cloak and the hat that His Majesty wore in Geneva, giving the League of Nations, famous speech. So even holding on to objects like this that he wore in Europe, and then obviously that came back to Ethiopia. And again, you can get a sense, they've got these kind of waxwork figures. That's Menelik II on the right and His Majesty Haile Selassie on the left. But you can see there just the sheer space. These are two completely different buildings, and the sheer space. But underneath in the basement, so they said in the time of His Majesty, the basement was a place where the lions were, you know, kept food and wine, etc., etc. But during the time of the dirge, so you know, Haile Mengistu was the Marxist military dictator who overthrew His Majesty in 1974. Part of the rationale was about the opulence and the riches that needs to be distributed amongst the people. You know, it was a traditional Marxist idea. But actually, Mengistu still, you know, he moved into that palace, made that palace his own, and turned the basement into a torture chamber where many of the local people. So there's actually a very interesting, and I think quite a respectful, sensitive display at the bottom, talking about the people that were tortured and, you know, became martyrs, etc., and the challenges of the dirge regime that actually, you know, didn't live up to what it said it was aiming to do. Yeah. So highly controversial. Don't really want to get into the politics, but
it's represented.
Yeah, but it is represented. But I think it's actually done in a quite balanced way in Unity Park. But I know there's lots of different opinions about the palaces and what they should be used for, and I'm not advocating either way. But I'm just glad that it's still there and accessible for people to go to, and not turned into a car park or Debenhams or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's actually, you can still access it, and actually the history is still there and preserved, and it, you know, it could have been bulldozed. The Wednesday is a very slow day, and again I'll get into the reason why in a couple of slides time, but we went to visit and stay with our friend Adishiwa Asawasan, and she lives on the northeast of Addis Ababa, Legatafo, in the Oromia region, and just rested really, and we were kind of told to rest, and I'll explain why in a moment. This is Addis on the right, preparing bread for the next day. So this huge bread that she made, that she'd just taken out of the oven. And yeah, we ate a lot of bread during this visit, but Ethiopians like bread. And I was like, I can't eat any more bread. But it was very nice, it was very beautiful. So, the Thursday, the 22nd of September, this was a very significant day. Rose at 5 in the morning, wow. And we had to be at this church.
1 in the morning.
1 in the morning.
1 in the Julian calendar morning.
Oh, don't start that.
Well, that's why it was significant.
Yeah. Well, 5 o'clock our time, but also in the morning, and then to be at the church for 6 o'clock. So, and this is the church that we were at. So, Yaba Ado is the district, Debre is mountain, Madahinat, which is medicine. I can't pronounce, I'm sorry, but Madahinam was Saviour of the World Church, and this is the church. So it's a local church in the Yaba Ado district. And this is where it gets much more personal, really. And this is the first time I've spoken about this in public. Only those really close to me know what I'm about to say. But for many years, I've been really, you know, I say many years, I'm talking about decades, really. Really interested in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and, you know, just find it a really beautiful, tradition, way of life, faith, etc., and sets of traditions. So I had arranged with Addis in advance for my baptism into the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So that's what we were doing on this day, which is why we had to rest on that day before and basically do nothing. So these are some shots that Rob kindly took. This is the baptism room. It's a building at the top of, you know, where you see the church. So the room that we are in is sort of behind where this photograph was taken, but it's a huge area around the circumference of the church. And this is in the baptism room. So that's me on the right on the blue chair. And 3 people getting baptized that day, 2 babies and me. And it is really interesting. So the day before this, Addis told me that the priest had contacted her and said, oh, yeah, looking forward to meeting, you know, Sean the next day, and is his hair ready? Is his hair ready? And by that he meant, has he shaved his head? Because when you get baptized, you're meant to get your head shaved. And she was like, well, no, as a Rasta, you know, that's not going to happen. Do you know what I mean? The hair is a covenant to God, and it signifies, you know, your faith already. You know, as an outward manifestation of the heart is how Rastas describe the dreadlocks. And also, she talks about how Jesus was baptized, and when Jesus got baptized, he didn't shave his head. So she had this whole reasoning with the priest, and then the priest said, okay, yeah, I agree, and so he agreed to baptize me. What I didn't know, that the priest hadn't had the conversation with the other priests, because there's about 10 other priests at the time, so it's not just him that needs convincing. This is the baby that got baptized just before me. So bearing in mind there's 2 babies with their mothers and me, the priest that agreed to baptize me thought I was going to go last. So everyone else would be out of the room, and then they have that conversation or whatever. But I got called up second. So I got called up to the front, and you know in Scooby-Doo when they pull off the mask of the baddie? It was literally like that. The priest had me like that, and he just pulled off the shawl off the top of my head, and my hair was there. And it was like... And in my mind, I mean, again, it was all in Amharic, so I didn't know what was being said, but Addis was involved in the conversation, and the priest was talking to the priest that agreed to baptize me, etc. In my mind, that went on for about 10 minutes. When I look back at the video that Rob took, it's very quick, you know what I mean? But in my mind, time slowed down. But I have to say, even though I was very nervous, and I actually thought they were just going to call it off, I always felt safe, they were respectful, you know, they were smiling, and actually, you know, I was nervous but not intimidated. But then the priest, so however long it took, but it definitely wasn't as long as I imagined it took, but they agreed to baptize me. And again, I'm being very transparent. Again, as an educator, as Brother Malcolm was talking about, you know, this is a personal thing that happened, and, you know, I won't just show this to all and sundry, but actually in this type of space, for the type of event that this is, I think it's important for me to share and be honest amongst friends that you are. So we had to kind of, I had to rotate, I think it might have been at the compass point, so at each point of the font, the priest would pray, and then I had to rotate around. And I was literally getting dragged around because I couldn't understand the instructions. So, because I don't speak Amharic, so the priest had me by the arm, just pulling me, like. But then I had to sit on the side, and then one of the priests, just around this moment the photograph was taken, and he said, from this day onwards, your name is Haile Mariam, don't forget it, Haile Mariam, power of Mary, Haile Mariam. And then it continued, so then there was a process.
Mary's Day as well.
Yeah, St. Mary's Day, yeah. They brought, because you have to be fully naked when you get baptized, and holy water's poured on you 3 times. So everyone went out of the room, they covered me with this painting, so it was private, and then that moment happened. These are beautiful photographs here taken by Rob. And just to put it in context, you know, I'm a photographer as well, so I take a lot of pictures. On this day, I took 3 photographs because I was so immersed in what was happening, you know. Rob took like 3,000 photographs. A beautiful picture here of Addis with the priest, Abba Kassis Habel. I saw this foundation stone, so I wanted to get a picture taken with that, and I asked my friend Redate to translate it when I came back. And you can, with Ethiopian names, they're often phonetic, how they're spelt when they're put into the Roman, you know, numerals, as it were. So you can spell it with this gap or not a gap, sometimes with a Y. I prefer it all one word, the first iteration. But yeah, it's a beautiful day, and for the rest of that day, I had to just rest and not do anything. I wasn't allowed to touch water. So after you take the holy water, and I had communion in the main church afterwards, then you're not allowed to touch water. You can drink it, but not touch it. So you just resting for the whole day. But yeah, it's very, and I had to wear white, so those in the market, that's why I bought the white clothes and then was wearing it. So after I have the holy water put on me, that's when you then put on those white clothes and you keep that on for the rest of the day. Yeah. And then that's the baptism certificate there that I've got proudly now at home.
We've got a couple of minutes.
Okay.
If that.
Do you want to jump through?
No, carry on. Oh yeah, birth certificate.
Oh yeah. So, yeah, it's this baptism certificate. Yeah.
It's like a new birth. It is a new birth.
Yeah.
It is a new birth. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
We'll talk about this bit quickly.
So we went, we were hooked up by Princess Esther to meet with her colleagues at university under the Heritage Watch Ethiopia, another university space.
This used to be Crown Prince Afsawassan. Crown Prince Afsawassan's former home, so this was his palace.
And here we were given a tour by the gardener, Ato Gejahan. Ato, I think it just means like father, papa, old man, old respectful term for Ato. And Gejahan, he was a very expert in and love of plants and horticulture, so he was kind of head gardener there.
And just to flag up the banner on the left, this shows the partners, and Bath Spa University are one of the partners in this project. So there's ties with Bath already with what we're about to show you.
Yep, that's it. Betty and Simrat showed us around with Atagajahan. Lots of fake banana. I think that's fake banana. They call it fake banana. That's Simrat, and yeah.
So what they're aiming to do in that space is, it's about sustainability and the sustainability conversation in Addis Ababa, which is established but also emerging. So they're looking there at different crops and different ways of cultivation that enhance that sustainability story, really. And also looking to preserve the palace of the Crown Prince, who's Haile Selassie's son. The Saturday was very different. We were massively overrunning. All right, we'll just wrap 2 minutes and then we'll wrap up. So the Saturday was really important, actually, because it was just very different. So our friend, we got, I say our, Fairfield House, one of our friends is Nikita, who's from the Bahamas, but she actually spends a lot of time in Ethiopia since coming to Fairfield House. And she organised an event called Skate for Peace at Addis Ababa skate parks. And bearing in mind everything we've shown you as palaces and history, this was our real first time of seeing young Addis Ababa and, very contemporary and cool and, music. And it's girl skaters as well. It's Girl Skaters Addis Ababa, or Ethiopia Girl Skaters was their group. And they were doing artwork and other activities, and again, it was raising awareness and for looking for sustainability and global peace.
Yeah.
But it was just a very different side to Addis. It was actually also very refreshing, and I say this as a lover of history and palaces, but actually going here was just very different, and actually it's needed as well.
It's worth reiterating that Nikita, her interest and connection did come after her trip to Fairfield House.
Yeah.
So literally she was inspired by her trip here.
Yeah. And then we also went to the Zoma Museum, and the Zoma Museum is not just an ordinary museum, it's like the Botanical Gardens. They've got huge grounds, but they've also got a school. Essentially it's a private school. They've got a school.
And a dairy farm.
A dairy farm is the most incredible place.
Cows.
And their artists as well, Elias and Meskerem, who run it. Elias is they do many things, but one of his roles is as an artist, and you can see the carvings. This is all made out of mud, and is actual mud that the buildings are made out of, and they're just incredibly beautiful. And he's got an exhibition at the Onofini at the moment that opened last Friday, and that's going to be on there for quite a while, so it's definitely worth checking that out. But they also had, they were making a TV program for Meskel, which is the Search of the Holy Cross, which was going to be the following week. So they had school involved, they had different presenters giving talks, and they had the fire celebration at the end. It is just, yeah, a really beautiful occasion. We were there till late there that day.
Yeah.
And then literally the last day we met back up with Addis and her family, and this is at Hotel Guion, or the Guion Hotel, and that was another one of His Majesty's spaces, and he built this swimming pool for the local people, and it's still in use today. And you can see the Lion of Judah carvings on the side.
It's affordable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's affordable for people. I've back up with Addis to get the certificate as well. This was a local beverage.
Kudus Gilgis, St. George's beer.
And then we met up with Jamike, who many of you in the Rastafari community know. So Jamike did an interview with us. That will be coming out soon, and he's also an Imperial Voice DJ as well. He's been living out in Addis for 13 years, and then back to the airport. So, you know, just thank you for the opportunity. Give thanks to the Father. Give thanks to supporters, funders, Fairfield House, and also Emu and her family for the invitation to go out there. And it won't be the last time. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Ethiopia kuri ይገባሻል ታውደኑና አራዳማን ማነው አራዳኛው ሀገሬ ኢትዮጵያ ኩሪ ይገባሻል የማያስደፍሩ ጀግና ልጅ ወልደሻል ደመርማኔ ወረደኔው ታውደኑና አራዳማን ማነው አንተ መንገደኛ ልጠይቅህ ወሬ ከአባቴ ባድማ ተጠምዷል ወይ በሬ መጠመዱንማ ተጠምዶ ነበረ ደመለኛው ወይፈን ማነቂያ ሰበረ ደመን ማነው ዘራፍ አካኪ ዘራፍ አገሬ ኢትዮጵያ ጥቁርም አይደለሽ ጥቁር ነሽ አሉ ነጭም አይደለሽ ነጭ ነሽ አሉ ዘራፍ አካኪ ዘራፍ ዱብ ያለው እንደ በረዶ በልጅነቱ በረሃ ወርዶ በረሃ ዳሪ በሰው ጠመንጃ ወንዝ አሻጋሪ ሱሪ ዝቅ ጠጉር ፈተላ አሬት መጣብኝ ይወሮ በላ እዚህ ቁጭ ብሎ ደም ከሚያፈላ ስደደው አባይ ገድቦ ይብላብላታ ዘራፍ እያሽመሌ ባለች ቀጭነች ዘራፍ አካኪ ዘራፋታ أرجعوا بقى أرجع من يو أرجعني سوداننا أرجع من يو أرجعني زراف كاكي زراف كاكي زراف አሁንም ዘራፍ ጥቅም ዘራፍ ማን ይነካታል የጀግናን በራፍ ዘራፍ ተወዶ ዘራፍ ሲታጠቅ ልቡ አይሸበር ሆዱ አይጨነቅ ከጥላት ጋራ የሚደባለቅ ጥላት ሲመጣ እንደነፈርሶ ቁጭ ብሎ ቆየው 30 ጉርሶ በ30ም 30 ገሎ ገባበት ውጅም ጓንጫ ወድሮ አረካጅሬ ጠባው ጥጃ አንዱን በጥፊ አንዱን በርግጫ ሩበላተ ራበላተ እኛ እንግሊዞች ራበላተ እኛ ጣላኖች የቸገራቸው በጎንደር ቢሉ ማን ሊፈራቸው መይሳው አስሮ መድፋ ሰራቸው መድፎም ይገኛል ጣፋት ያለው ደብረ ታቦር ላይ ያፏት ያለው ያነ መድፋቸው ለውርደታቸው ምስክር ነው ሮበላተ ሮበልዬ የዛ ጀግና አገር የዛ ሰውዬ በረጅን አልቢን ያሰኛል ወዬ ሮበላተ መላው ጠፍታቸው ሲደናገሩ ለተንኮላቸው ጎጀን ይዳሉ ጎጃም ሽፈራው በላይ ሽፈራው ተቀበላቸው እየቆረጡ አባይ ጫላቸው አራይ ሰማ ሮበላተ ያውታቸው ሲደናገሩ ለተንኮላቸው ሲደናገሩ ለውርደታቸው ወሎ እንዲዳሉ ወሎስ ቢሄዱ ንጉሥ ሚካኤል ተቀበላቸው አጼ ምኒልክ የአድዋው ጀግና ከጣይቱ ጋር ጠላት የመታ ስሙ ይነሳል በሁሉም ቦታ ማለት ሴራው ይክሸፍበት ማማ የመጣብሽ አድማ እግሩ ሳር ያድርገው ጉልበቱን ቀጤማ አይሰማም ካቀባበለብሽ ብረት ከደገነ አምላክ ያግዝልሽ ላንቺ የወገነ ሴራው ይክሸፍበት የመጣብሽ አድማ እግሮ ሳር ያድርገው ጉልበቱን ቀጤማ ጸሎትሽ ይሰማ አምላክ ይለመንሽ ፈተና ዋይለቅ የሚፈታተንሽ አንገትሽ ራስሽን ችሎ ለየውና ማግስቱን ይውሰደኝ 10 ሞት ይምጣና እስካለኝ እማማ ላንቺ የማይተኙ የማያንገላፉ ቁም ይበሉ እንደ ጉም ከምድረ ገጽ ይጥፉ። ኢትዮጵያ ለዘላለም ከፍ ትበል። እወዳቸዋለሁ። አመሰግናለሁ። አራዳኛው አገሬ ኢትዮጵያ ኩሪ ይገባሻል። ደኑና አራዳማንማኔው አራዳኛው አገሬ ኢትዮጵያ ኩሪ ይገባሻል። የማያስደፍሩ ጀግና ልጅ ወልደሻል። ደመንማኔው ወረደኔው ተውደኑና አረደማንማኔው አንተ መንገደኛ ልጠይቅህ ወሬ ከአባቴ ባድማ ተጠምዷል ወይ በሬ መጠመዱንማ ተጠምዶ ነበረ ደመለኛው ወይፈን ማነቂያ ሰበረ ደመንማኔው አካኪ ዘራፍ ዘራፍ አገሬ ኢትዮጵያ ጥቁርም አይደለሽ ጥቁር ነሽ አሉ ነጭም አይደለሽ ነጭ ነሽ አሉ ዘራፍ አካኪ ዘራፍ ዱብ ያለው እንደ በረዶ በልጅነቱ በረሃ ወርዶ በረሃ ዳሪ በሰው ጠመንጃ ወንዝ አሻጋሪ ሱሪ ዝቅ ፀጉር ፈተላ አሬት መጣብኝ ይወሮ በላ እዚህ ቁጭ ብሎ ደም ከሚያፈላ ስደደው አባይ ገድቦ ይብላ ብላታ ዘራፍ አካኪ ዘራፍ እያት ሽመሌ ባለች ቀጭነች ዘራፍ አካኪ ዘራፋታ አረጃሎ ባባ አረዳማንማኔው አረዳኔው ሰውደኑና አራዳኛው ዘራፍ አካኪ ዘራፍ ዘራፍ አካኪ ዘራፍ አሁንም ዘራፍ ጥቅምን ዘራፍ ማን ይነካታል የጀግናን በራፍ ዘራፍ ተወዶ ዘራፍ ሲታጠቅ ልቡ አይሸበር ሆዱ አይጨነቅ ከጥላት ጋራ የሚደባለቅ ጠላት ሲመጣ እንደንፈርሶ ቁጭ ብሎ ቆየው 30 ጉርሶ በ30ም 30 ገሎ ገባበት ውጅም ጓንጫ ወድሮ አረካጅሬ ጠባው ጥጃ አንዱን በጥፊ አንዱን በርግጫ ሩበላተ ራበላተ እኛ እንግሊዞች ራበላተ እኛ እንግሊዞች እኛ ጣሊያኖች የቸገራቸው በጎንደር ቢሉ ማን ሊፈራቸው መይሳው አስሮ መድፋ ሰራቸው መድፎም ይገኛል ጣፋት ያለው ደብረ ታቦር ላይ ጣፋት ያለው ያነ መድፋቸው ለውርደታቸው ምስክር ነው ራበልዬ የዛ ጀግና አገር የዛ ሰውዬ በረጅን አልቢን ያሰኛል ወዬ ራበላተ መላው ጠፍታቸው ሲደናገሩ ለተንኮላቸው ጎጀን ይዳሉ ጎጃም ሽፈራው በላይ ሽፈራው ተቀበላቸው እያቆረጡ አባይ ጫላቸው አራይሰማ ራበላተ ያውታቸው ሲደናገሩ ለተንኮላቸው ሲደናገሩ ለምጠታቸው ወሎ እንዲዳሉ ወሎስ ቢሄዱ ንጉስ ሚካኤል ተቀበላቸው አጼ ምኒልክ የአድዋው ጀግና ከጣይቱ ጋር ጠላት የመታ ስሙ ይነሳል በሁሉም ቦታ ማለት ሴራው ይክሸፍበት ማማ የመጣብሽ አድማ እግሩ ሳር ያድርገው ጉልበቱን ቀጤማ አይሰማም ካቀባበለብሽ ብረት ከደገነ አምላክ ያግዝልሽ ላንቺ የወገነ ሴራው ይክሸፍበት የመጣብሽ አድማ እግሮ ሳር ያድርገው ጉልበቱን ቀጤማ ጸሎትሽ ይሰማ አምላክ ይለመንሽ ፈተና ዋይለቅ የሚፈታተንሽ አንገትሽ ራስሽን ችሎ ለየውና ማግስቱን ይውሰደኝ 10 ሞት ይምጣና እስከለይ እማማ ላንቺ የማይተኙ የማያንገላፉ ቁም ይበሉ እንደ ጉም ከምድረ ገጽ ይጥፉ። ኢትዮጵያ ለዘላለም ከፍ ትበል። እወዳቸዋለሁ። አመሰግናለሁ። አራዳኛው አገሬ ኢትዮጵያ ኩሪ ይገባሻል። ደኑና አራዳማርማኔው አራዳኛው አገሬ ኢትዮጵያ ኩሪ ይገባሻል። የማያስደፍሩ ጀግና ልጅ ወልደሻል።